Chapter 14, Part 2 of the Lives of the Three Misses Judsons by Arabella M. Wilson. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 14. Mrs. Boardman's Second Marriage. Removal to Maulmain. Letter from Mrs. Judson. Her son sent to America. Her husband's illness. On the 10th of April, 1834, Mrs. Boardman was married to one whose character she afterwards declared to be a complete assemblage of all that woman could wish to love and honor. The Reverend Dr. Judson. With him she removed to her new home in Maulmain, which had undergone wonderful changes since she left it in 1828. Then the only church there had 3 native members. Now she found there 3 churches numbering 200 members. Her duties were now different from what they had been, but not less important. In a letter written to a very intimate friend, 1 year after her marriage, we find her thus expressing herself: "I can truly say that the mission cause and missionary labor is increasingly dear to me every month of my life. I am now united with one whose heavenly spirit and example is deeply calculated to make me more devoted to the cause than I have ever been before. Oh, that I may profit by such precious advantages! Many missionaries have arrived from America and established themselves in different places. Several resided at Maulmain, so that Mrs. Judson, as we must now call her, could enjoy much Christian society beside that of natives. But neither she nor her fellow laborers had much time to devote exclusively to social intercourse. Besides schools to superintend, and Bible classes to conduct, and prayer meetings to attend, societies were to be formed among the half-educated native females, in which they could be instructed in maternal and social duties. In addition to these cares, Mrs. Judson took upon herself the task of acquiring a new language, in order to instruct the Peguans, a people who had put themselves under the protection of the British after revolting against the Burmans. This people were so numerous in Maulmain that the missionaries felt constrained to furnish them with instruction. Under these labors Mrs. Judson's health again failed, but after some weeks of suffering she began to recover, and for many subsequent years her health was uninterrupted. In a letter written some time after, she accounts for her enjoyment of health in the following manner: "When I first came up from Tavoy, I was thin and pale, and though I call myself pretty well, I had no appetite for food, and was scarce able to walk half a mile. Soon after I was called to endure a long and severe attack of illness, which brought me to the brink of the grave. I was never so low in any former illness, and the doctor who attended me has since told me that he had no hope of my recovery, and that when he came to prescribe medicine for me, it was more out of regard to the feelings of my husband than from any prospect of it affording me relief. I lay confined to my bed week after week, unable to move, except as Mr. Judson sometimes carried me in his arms from the bed to the couch for a change, and even this once brought on a return of the disease, which very nearly cost me my life. I never shall forget the precious seasons enjoyed on that sick bed. Little George will tell you about it, if you should ever see him. I think he will always remember some sweet conversations I had with him on that state of his soul at that time. Dear child, his mind was very tender, and he would weep on account of his sins, and would kneel down and pray with all the fervor and simplicity of childhood. He used to read the Bible to me every day, and commit little hymns to memory by my bedside. It pleased my Heavenly Father to raise me up again, although I was for a long time very weak. As soon as I was able, I commenced riding on horseback, and used to take a long ride every morning before sunrise. After a patient trial, I found that riding improved my health, though many times I should have been more discouraged and given it up, but for the perseverance of my husband. After riding almost every day for 4 or 5 months, I found my health so much improved, and gained strength so fast, that I began to think walking might be substituted. About this time my nice little pony died, and we commenced a regular system of exercise on foot, walking at a rapid pace far over the hills beyond the town, before the sun was up, every morning. We have continued this perseveringly up to the present time, and during these years my health has been better than at any time previous since my arrival in India, and my constitution seems to have undergone an entire renovation. In Burmah proper, that is, the part of Burmah not under British government, the native Christians enjoyed no toleration from the government, and often suffered bitterly. But in Maulmain and other places in British Burmah, religion flourished, and converts were multiplied. Mr. Vinton, a new missionary, preached with great power in the Karen churches, and that people, says Mrs. Judson, flocked to the kingdom by scores. Mr. Judson was revising his translation of the Bible, a task of 5 years' duration, and preaching to the Burmese church, while Mrs. J. instructed in the schools and translated into Peguan such tracts as were thought most calculated to acquaint that people with Christian doctrine. She afterwards translated into that language the New Testament and the life of Christ. But on the arrival of Mr. Haswell, she gave to him all her books and papers in this language, and only attended to it in future, so far as to assist him in his studies. Of the severest trial to which Mrs. Judson was called during the remainder of her life, she gives an account in the following eloquent words: "After deliberation accompanied me with tears and agony and prayers, I came to the conviction that it was my duty to send away my only child, my darling George, and yesterday he bade me a long farewell. Oh, I shall never forget his looks as he stood by the door and gazed at me for the last time. His eyes were filling with tears, and his little face red with suppressed emotion, but he subdued his feelings, and it was not till he had turned away and was going down the steps that he burst into a flood of tears. I hurried to my room, and on my knees, with my whole heart, gave him up to God, and my bursting heart was comforted from above. My reason and judgment tell me that the good of my child requires that he should be sent to America, and this of itself would support me in some little degree. But when I view it as a sacrifice made for the sake of Jesus, it becomes a delightful privilege. I cannot but hope he will one day return to Burmah, a missionary of the cross, as his dear father was. This is in some respects the severest trial I ever met with. It would be delightful to accompany the dear boy in his perilous journey to the fatherland, and to transcribe the yearning and affectionate letters of his mother, both to him and to those whose charge he was entrusted. They could not but heighten our opinion of his excellence in the maternal relation, as well as the great sensibility of her heart. But we are warned that our pages are swelling too great a number. Ours is but a sketch, an outline. Those who would see the full-length portrait of our heroine must consult the glowing canvas of her biographer and successor, Fanny Forrester. Her next trial was, to see her beloved husband suffering with a severe cough, which she feared would end in pulmonary consumption. To avert this dreaded result, he was obliged to leave her and try a long sea voyage. The account of their parting, and her touching letters during his absence, would greatly enrich our little sketch, had we room to copy them. We must find a place for one short extract from the letters. Your little daughter and I have been praying for you this evening. At times the sweet hope that you will soon return, restored to perfect health, buoys up my spirit. But perhaps you will find it necessary to go farther, a necessity from which I cannot but shrink with doubt and dread, or you may come back only to die with me. This last agonizing thought crushes me down in overwhelming sorrow. I could not feel unwillingly that our Heavenly Father should do as He thinks best with us. But my heart shrinks from the prospect of living in this dark, sinful, friendless world without you. But the most satisfactory view is to look away to that blissful world where separations are unknown. There, my beloved Judson, we shall surely meet together, and we shall also meet many loved ones who have gone on before us to that haven of rest. Her fears were not realized. In a few months Mr. Judson was restored to her and the suffering mission cause, in greatly improved health. End of chapter 14, part 2.